Today I have Lacy, who is a memoir writer. She writes memoirs for people who simply want to pass down their knowledge, their history, and their stories. So, Mia, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me along.
Alright, now you write memoirs.
I am a memoir writer, that's right. I create personal narratives for people and their families.
So how did you get into it?
I'm a advertising copywriter by trade and a public relations consultant by profession. So over my career, I've written a lot of different things. I've written videos, I've written radio ads, I've written the copy on the back of shampoo bottles.
Yeah.
So when I about a dozen years ago, I sold my public relations business, and I deliberately planned to study how to write memoirs and to evolve into creating people's memoirs as my next phase. So I did quite a lot of research, and it's quite a fascinating subject once you have a look around what's available and how you create a wonderful family heirloom, really, of someone's life story. And I spoke to my mum about what I was doing, and together, the first memoir that I did was a collaboration with her where we created my grandmother's memoir together. Now, my grandmother had passed away 10 years before, so with help from my mum, I put together Grandma's memoir, which we called The Gentle Gardener, because she was very, very good at creating gardens. And so we created her life story, and that was the very first one that I did. And then I did some radio on ABC about how to write a memoir and the different types of memoir, and I had a call from a businessman that I had known a few decades earlier, and he said, "Mia, I'd like you to create my memoir." So there we're off and running, David.
Excellent. Now you just said there that you've got different types of memoirs. What are some of the different types? And does your writing approach change to each type?
So people tend to think of a memoir as something that you write in your later years, and it encapsulates the whole of your life, like your life story. And while that's true, that type of memoir is prevalent, there are different types of memoir. For example, you can create a snapshot memoir of the 2 years that you spent as an aid worker in the Solomon Islands, or when you worked on an oil rig for a few years. Or the other style of memoir, the third style, is if you take a theme. For example, it might be, go back to my grandmother, the gardens that you created, 7 or 8 different gardens that you created in your life, and you look at your life through the lens of the gardens. Or you might have been a boatie, and you might have owned boats ever since you were a kid. So the memoir is themed through the lens of the boats that you've owned. So that's what I mean about the 3 different types of memoir. And then the other aspect of memoir is that you can have a personal memoir, which is one person's recollection, or you can have a collective memoir. For example, I did one a few years ago with these 7 siblings, 7 wonderful Italian siblings, and each of them had a chapter, and I'm doing one at the moment which involves 12 men, an experience that they shared that was very, very formative. So that's a collective memoir as well as just a personal memoir. So yeah, it's an interesting way of walking through somebody's story.
Yeah, because I kind of think when I first heard of memoir writing, I kind of thought, it's just a bit like writing a biography.
It's different to writing a biography because a memoir is, as I said, a personal narrative. Whereas if you are someone's biographer, you will probably do a lot of research into that person as well as interviewing them. But a memoir isn't like a biography, because what's more important in memoir is the feelings and the emotion rather than the dates. This is what I always say to clients. It doesn't matter what time your child was born, if it was 4 a.m. or 5 a.m., but how did you feel? What were the flowers like that you got from your husband? You know, so a memoir is not, it is detailed in terms of everyone wants their dates, you know, to be correct, and they want to have it in order. But a biography is a very, very different thing, style, to what a personal memoir is.
But what attracts you to writing memoir? What keeps you going? What are the...
I love I really enjoy the people who I meet and whose stories I take down. Invariably they are in their 80s or their 90s. The eldest client that I ever worked with was 97. And they are very lovely people. They're very close to their families. They've had a long life covering many aspects, and because of the fact that most of them are around about the same age, you know, in their 80s or early 90s, some of their life arcs tend to be fairly similar, if I may say that, well.
Yep.
And it's a very... They tend, as I said, to be close to their families, and they're always their families that reach out and contact me and commission me, if you like, to create the memoir for their mum or their dad. And it's just, we get together, we have a meeting, and we, you know, have a chat, and I get a few biographical details, usually from their children, or sometimes they'll just, you know, give me a very brief outline of their life so that I understand who their husband was or where they were born, and just a few really sketchy details always helps to have that backbone. And then we just sit down with a cup of tea and we talk, and I ask them questions and they talk to me, and I think it's just a technique. As a journalist, I know how to interview people and how to edit and sort of bring the chapters out into something. And it's always a collaborative process. It's always something that there's three people involved. So there's myself and there's my subject, and then there's the person who has commissioned me, and it's usually the daughter or the son. And the three of us just work together, and we sort of work in chunks, you know, like maybe do 2.5, 3 hours of interviews, and then I go and transcribe it, and then we have what I call a working draft, and so the subject gets the working draft, and we start, you know, oh my goodness, we really need to have a chapter about this because I really love this. And so it's just, and it's a very gentle process. And I've been told time and time again by the people who I write their memoirs that they love it. It's quite cathartic. In fact, I've had a couple of lovely clients who didn't really want to finish the project. They were enjoying it so much. And one lady actually said to me after I presented her book, she said, I think I've got another memoir in me somewhere, Mia. I think we should go through this again.
Yep. And you said there that a lot of your clients are elderly. You know, do you think that perhaps, you know, when you're writing their stories, it's really important because they have some historical knowledge that they can pass down as well to generations?
It is lovely to watch when they get presented their memoir, and most of them always say, gosh, I had no idea that this was going to be the result, because, you know, I've just had an ordinary life. But I always say no one's life is ordinary at all. Everyone has a story. Everyone's life is very, very unique, and it's just about bringing it forward and bringing it out. I don't create memoirs for famous people.
No.
I create memoirs for your parents, you know, and it's so important to have that history. I remember when I did my own mum and my dad's memoirs, and I learnt, we're close, but I learnt things that I didn't know. For example, that my dad, who is an immigrant, he said, I never really felt a part of this country until my first grandchild arrived. And once my first grandchild entered the world, I felt like I really was a part of this country and not an immigrant. You know, those are the sort of things that you don't, those are the little gems that fall out when you deliberately set a question to people and ask them to bring forward things. And quite often we look back at the books and go, now which was mum's school when she was, and so everything is just there to refer to. And our books look, they look like coffee table books. They're beautifully laid out. They're very beautifully designed and illustrated, and they have all of the illustrations from the families. It's not just photos. It can be a collection of love letters tied up with a ribbon, or it could be the trophies that you won for the show jumping that you did. It's everything in your life. It could be a favourite coach. It could be we just put everything under the lens that matters to you. It's not just photos. So it's a really lovely reflection of what is important to you in your life.
And you were saying there that when you do sit down with someone and you're talking and you're finding out all this information, all this beautiful stuff about their life story, how do you navigate when you find something else and you're trying to, get more information about one particular subject?
I think that most people, when we start, I say to them, this is your story, so you have to think about what you want to include, what you are passionate about. And as I said, as a journalist, I can guide them through. I can bring certain things out, ask them questions. Most people are very, very happy to share their memories, and surprisingly, early memories, as people get older, tend to be far more real and vivid. The early chapters in these memoirs are full with anecdotes and stories and descriptions, and then as it goes towards the last few decades, they get shorter and shorter and shorter, because although a lot happened, I think the memories aren't as vivid as they were in the young years, if that makes sense. And people quite often sort of say, for example, they'll go, so my Uncle Brian, he's really, really interesting, and I want to tell you, all about him, and I really want to have this, and I'm sort of coming into them and saying, it's your story. Uncle Brian is amazing, and let's put him in this chapter, but let's not lose sight that this isn't Uncle Brian's memoir. This is your story and how he fits into your narrative. He was like a mentor, he was a favourite uncle, but we need to put him in the context of your lifeline, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Not to draw away from your subject or your person you're interviewing. Yeah, you want to capture them. I mean, Uncle Brian might be really important to them, but it's their story.
It is their story, and most people are very, very easy to work with in terms of they're there because they want to be there. They love to have a chat about. They love talking about how they met their partner. They love talking about their children and watching them find their way through life. And they quite often have different chapters about what they're passionate about. The collective memoir, which I did for the siblings, they were all Italian, and I suggested that the they put their favourite recipes at their end of their chapters. I thought that was a really good idea. It was a little bit selfish of me, David, because I wanted those recipes too. And the other thing that often happens is that people will question as whether or not they should put something in their memoir, and they'll say, so I'm just not sure if I should say this or if I should talk about this. And I always say, well, it's your memoir, so if you want to include something that is important to you, then by all means include it if that's what you want, because you're the only one that needs to make a decision and decide that this is something that's relevant, or this is something that's special, or this is something that's unique, and you know who's going to be reading it, and you know who the family are and what may or may not interest them. And I always say, look, if you're thinking of including it, then by all means include it. If it mattered to you, then it's going to matter to the reader.
Now, when you say that, something that comes to mind to me immediately is like, if there's something of a family rift, and that's the person's way of expressing something that they've held for so long. That can be a bit of a tricky one.
Well, every family has, a few skeletons in the closet. It's whether or not they're going to divulge what those stories are. And I've had more than one occasion where my subject looks at me and says, Mia, just turn that thing off. I'm going to tell you what happened, but I don't want it to go in the book.
Yep. And I guess, memories are something that we all, and nostalgia, that we all look fond upon. Why do you love it so much?
Memory's really interesting. I'm not a scientist, and I'm not able to interpret some of the things that I see, but it's so interesting for me when I come across a situation, as I did recently, where the person who commissioned me, the son, was telling me about an incident that happened with his dad, and he described it really, really vividly and said, Mia, I want you to ask Dad about this because it's really, really important that this goes in the memoir. Yep. So I asked his dad about it, and I said, do you remember that time where this occurred? And he went, oh, yeah. And just, to him, it was a very small part of his experience, because then I realised that this wasn't his memoir. He could recall this, right? It wasn't his memory. He could recall this incident happening. To his son, however, this is a massive memory in his son's life. But to his dad, it was a small incident that wasn't really relatable. So my point is, when two people go through the same experience, people take it on board very, very differently. To some, it's just a small incident. To others, it can be a massive memory. And I think that that's really interesting.
Have you ever had like that, when you say have a conflict of interest with perhaps the one person that you're interviewing and the one that has commissioned you?
Oh no, I don't ever remember having a conflict of interest with anyone, because one of the lovely things about being asked...
Maybe the person who's commissioning you has got a different intention. Like, for example, like you were saying, they want this story to come out, rather than that might not be the person's memory.
I've never been in a situation where that has been an issue, because the clients and the subjects are often just very, very close families. Obviously, the process can take months, years, in fact, to create a memoir. And every time that I'm working with someone, I'm always so impressed how close they are to their family, how close they are to their children, and how they've talked about this and they want the same outcomes. And it's really a joy to be able to work with these people and to deliver what they want and to create a beautiful, lasting book that their grandchildren will have. And that's something else that we use quite a lot as a technique, as we ask grandchildren to write a letter to their grandparents, saying their memories of them and saying what they think of them. And we include those letters to grandma or grandpa in the memoir, and it's a way of the children to put their lens on the person who's the subject of the memoir, and it's a really nice expression to close the book with.
Now, as a memoir writer, do you have a favourite style of memoir writing? If so, why?
I'm very interested in different clients and what they want. And the style of the memoir is really, really driven by the character and the personality of the person that you're working with. And that's where it becomes really, really interesting, because people have their traits, their characteristics, and getting into that leads you into the book. And the chapters write themselves. They organise themselves. They fall into the order that they need to be.
Now, with your writing process, when you have interviewed the subject, as so, how is your writing? What can you walk me through your writing process, or how you how you conduct all of those things, and how you actually start writing?
So, with the technique that I have developed, it's a very, very simple way of sitting down over a cup of tea, pushing record on my phone app, and asking some questions to the client, and then they'll just be recorded on my phone. And then once I go back to my office, I'll just push play, and I will transcribe everything into a working draft.
Yep.
And I think it's very important to capture the way people speak. Everyone has a different nuance. Everyone has a way of speaking that their family know, the expressions that they use. And I don't ever want to over-edit person's speech, because they need to sound like they are. And probably a third of the memoirs which I've done are people who are immigrants, and English is not their first language, but they speak English very well, but they have a very unique way of voicing themselves, and they have their own favourite expressions, and these crop up all the time. So when I transcribe, I try and leave the person's voice on the page. I think that's really, really important. Yeah. And so when, the family gets it, they recognise all those ways and expressions that the family know so well. And then once the working draft is done, we get all the illustratives, all the objects, the photographs, all done, and I work with a graphic designer who is a miracle worker, and together we create what we call a layout draft, which is the first time the client sees the process as a book. And so that has everything collated and drafted, and usually we spend a few months working on that process and putting all the captions in, and it becomes a book. And I always say to clients, it's very important to think about how you're going to present the life memoir to the subject. Is there something coming up? Is there a family get-together? Is it going to be Easter where the family's together? Is it someone's birthday or anniversary? Because it's very nice to make an event of it when you present someone's life story to them. It's a bit like that old TV series, This Is Your Life. You need to honour the moment and make it special for someone when they get their life story. So I usually deliver a couple of copies wrapped up with a ribbon so that it's got more of a bang.
Now, I'm going to put you on the spot here. If someone was to write your memoir, what would you like to have included?
If someone was to write my memoir, I think I would find that a very difficult process to go through, David. I think it would be a matter of... no one's ever asked me that before. That's a great interview question. I don't know how I would go about doing that, because I would probably want to lead the process and not be a very good subject at all, David.
Oh, well, okay. Yeah, how you capture someone's mannerisms in word.
Well, I'm fortunate to be able to have the recordings.
Yep.
Through the and playing those back, you can pick up expressions. You'll immediately, in the very first session with somebody, you'll know what they have. Like, it could be a turn of phrase, it could be the way that they punctuate their way of speaking. It's just, everyone has a very unique speech pattern or style, and when people speak, it's not quite the same as when you read a written sentence in that you have to kind of invert the phraseology when you translate. It's hard to explain, but there is quite a lot of editing involved to get an interview into a transcription. And I'm very happy to say that there is no artificial intelligence that does it that does it yet, because it's a very personal process. And someone, when I'm interviewing them, they'll mention something and I'll go, "Ooh, that sounds really interesting. Let's go back and tell me a little bit more about that, and how it affected you, and did that alter the course of your life?" To me, they may think it's a little bit trivial, but once you ask them more questions about it, you will find the relevance of that as well.
Yeah, I know you just touched on a subject. Every writer that's good and genuine, don't really like AI. Are you worried about, in the future, that's going to perhaps demonise memoir writing, or writing in general?
There's many ways at the moment that you can create your life story, your memoir. The process that I use is an intimate process, and it has been very successful for the last dozen years for me. It's something that I enjoy. It's something that the clients are very happy with. There are other options around about, if you explore online, there's certain ways that you can create a memoir using apps or story prompts or something like that. I won't comment on those because I haven't used them and I don't know how they turn out. But I think that one of the things that the families always seem to want and enjoy is the authenticity of the final result. And I've used AI myself in different forms, not for memoir writing, but to research things that I'm interested in. And it's going to definitely be in our lives. And from a writer's perspective, I'm not worried about it, because I think it's a great tool that I can see how it really makes things a lot simpler, a lot easier, but it certainly hasn't taken over either the memoir writing or the research which I've done for other projects which I've been involved in. So I think it's fascinating to look at AI applied. I recently had an experience where I had to go to Telstra, to one of the Telstra shops, to ask them a question about travelling and staying connected, and this young gentleman went to the Telstra AI and got all the answers that in a matter of seconds, what I wanted to know, which I had researched their website for and couldn't find. And I said to him, how did you manage to do that? Because this is not on the website. He went, our AI has access not just to the website but to the whole of Telstra, which is why it's come back with the answers to these questions which you couldn't find online.
Now, Adam, do you have a memoir that you've written that really, really, spoke to you? Was there one that particularly stands out? They've
all been lovely stories about really wonderful people. I I don't have a favourite. I have wonderful memories of the people and the stories that they told me. I've been commissioned by a family twice to do, both sides of the family. And I've had some lovely experiences with immigrants and their stories, as I mentioned before. My dad was an immigrant, so it's a story that I'm a little bit familiar with, but then everyone has their own particular take on that. One of the interesting things that I did have happen quite early was I was asked to create a memoir of a lady who couldn't speak English.
Yeah.
And so she was in her 80s, and although she'd lived out here for quite a long time, many decades in fact, her English was still really, really limited, and we just knew that she didn't have the English to be able to create the book that the family wanted. So I had to find somebody who could speak her native language, who was able to take down her story and then translate it from her native language into English. And in a small community, to find that person who was an acceptable interviewer, to go into her home, it was amazing. And it all came together. I just put it out there and said to my contacts, does anyone speak this language, and can anyone refer me to somebody who may be able to help me with this? And within about 2 weeks, we had the perfect person who was a ex-school teacher and who'd lived in this lady's country of origin and spoke it beautifully, and she was very much liked by the family, and she took it down in her native language, translated it into English, and left the voice and the cadence of the subject in it, which I thought was a really amazing thing to do. And then we just continued with the process once we had the working draft. So, yeah, doing it for someone who really didn't have English language was an amazing challenge, and I was just so happy with the way it turned out.
How do potential clients approach you? How do they get in contact with you?
It's part of, I think, maybe a network of people of that age, that generation, because they'll recommend to someone in the family. They might hear me on a radio interview. They may contact me through the website, through just Googling memoir writing. But quite a lot of the contacts initially come through referrals. They know someone who's had memoir done, or they've seen it, and it's through word of mouth, I suppose, would be the main process, and referrals from people. But occasionally, like this, I pop my head up and do an interview.
Yeah. Do you learn about society as it was? Yeah, do you learn some really historical moments ago? Oh, I've never heard, never known that.
That's a very interesting question, and yes, I've learnt a lot about my adopted state because I come from interstate, and now I've done probably 10 years of memoirs with people who have grown up and had their lives. I've really sort of started to put the jigsaw pieces of my adopted state together, which is I've had clients who started off in the gold rush and then become pastoralists, and I've had clients who've had very interesting businesses which have really created so much of the process in the state. And so for me, it's been really good to put it all together, as I said, like a jigsaw, piece by piece, through the different people who've shared their life stories with me.
Well, Mia, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, David, and I think it's been a great experience for me talking to you this morning. Thank you so much for being interested in how to create a memoir and how people's life stories do matter and how family traditions are important.
Thank you.